Okay, here we go. This is Jacob Schmitt with huntfishlife.com. This video here, I'm going to talk about fishing the different water column. Okay, if you're setting, let's say 20 foot of water, you've got, 20 foot of water that you're over the top of. Now, if you're focused on the very bottom in 20 foot of water, you're here, and you're focused on fishing on the bottom, and the fish are sitting in the middle of the water column. So say they're setting or they're focused in at 10 foot. In that 10 foot range, you're not going to catch very many fish. Now, vice versa, if you're sitting in 20 foot of water and the fish are focusing in, or you're fishing the top, or you're fishing the 10 foot and the fish are focusing on the bottom or the top, you're not going to do very well. Where if you're, in 20 foot of water, and this might sound crazy. I know there's a huge misconception with catfish with people. Everybody thinks that they're bottom feeders. I used to snag here in Arkansas and use several treble hooks on a really big fishing pole, and you get below the dam and you cast out, you yank, and you just hook the fish. I was really, really good at it. And I used the fact that I understood that catfish were very rarely on the bottom. Very rarely. And they would sit in the middle a lot. Sometimes they'd sit right on the very top. Like literally you'd see fish rolling out in the middle of the Arkansas River, cast out and not let your hooks or your weight sink at all, and boom, you'd catch catfish every time. 30, 40 pounders, blue cats. One trick with running trot lines, fishing for catfish, sometimes the fish just are not on the bottom. A lot of guys, they put their trot lines out, they set their trot lines on the bottom. They sink them, weight them down on the bottom. And you can catch fish like that almost every time, especially if you're in a place where there's a lot of catfish. But if you really want to catch them, if you'll take that trot line and you'll float it in spots. How you can do that is you can take you a jug and float that trot line, and we'd always take a weight that had a leader. Like if it's 20 foot deep in the spot, if we wanted it 5 foot under the surface, we would tie a leader on there with a weight, and then tie like a 20 ounce Mountain Dew bottle on it with a 3 foot leader, and put a little bit of water in there so it would just hold it down under the water so people couldn't see your trot line, and catch some big blue cat at 5 foot below the surface, or 3 foot below the surface, or whatever. You got to be careful that you don't float it too high where people's cutting it and getting into their boat motors and stuff as they come through. But that's one thing that a lot of people don't know, that you can float your trot lines and fish them 2-3 foot deep in 30-40 foot of water and catch the heck out of some fish, especially at night. They come up a lot of times at night and they'll feed up higher, where a lot of times in the daytime the catfish will be a little bit lower in the water column. If you're yo-yo fishing, some of you put out 20 yo-yos, 30 yo-yos, how many ever you put out, if you put them out, some of them you put at the bottom, some of them you put mid-range, and some of them you put your bait up higher. Some of them you want that bait a few inches below the surface, and then you can see where most of your bites are, and you can adjust. Bass fishing, okay, we're going to talk about that. That's what I do now pretty much exclusively. So I'm going to cover water column when you're bass fishing, because if you follow me, me and my wife fish bass tournaments. Here's her two favorite baits. It's a river to sea whopper flopper. It's a top water bait exclusively, and her other favorite bait is a buzz bait. And they're both topwater baits. And I'll tell you, if she's going to catch fish, it's going to be on a whopper plopper or a buzz bait. Pretty much the only way she's going to catch one. With her being stubborn like that, I've been stubborn and tell her, well, there's no sense in you fishing that. We'd be out in 25, 30 foot of water and fishing, and I couldn't catch the fish. And she said, well, I'm going to use my whopper plopper. I'm like, whatever, just throw it. It's a waste of time. And she'd throw it and bloosh, catch fish 34, 40 foot deep water, where the fish have rose in the water column and they're hitting top water, and I can't catch them with nothing else. Next thing you know, I'm throwing a buzzbait or a whopper plopper, and we catch a limit in a tournament on top water out in the middle of the lake over 30 foot of water. There are times where the fish they're keyed in on certain water columns. So when you go fishing, bass fishing, crappie fishing, cat fishing, you may want to investigate different parts of that water column, okay? If you're bass fishing, okay, let's just start out top water. I mean, you've got the whopper plopper, any top water bait, and you've got frogs, the buzz bait. Them are good top waters. There's others. Also depends on the water depth that you're fishing. Obviously, if you're fishing 2 or 3 foot of water, that the difference in the water column's not as important, okay? If you're fishing 1 foot deep, you know, you run a buzzbait over top of the fish, it's only 1 foot from him. If you're fishing in 30 foot of water and you run a buzzbait over top of the fish that's setting on the bottom, that's keyed in on the bottom, you're probably not going to get bit by that fish. So let's look at that more mid-range. One of my favorite baits for the mid-range, in the middle of the water column, jerkbait, and this is a deeper diving jerkbait. So this particular jerkbait here is going to go 10, 11 foot deep, where the other Strike King, the regular 300 series Strike King, runs about 5, 6 foot deep or something like that. And then you can change your line size to change how deep it'll run. So that's a good mid, when the fish are keying in on the middle section of water column. You know, maybe they're in 10 foot of water, they're sitting on the bottom, but they're looking up. Happens all the time. They focus upwards. They may be sitting 1 or 2 foot up above the bottom, looking up. As shad swim over, that's where your jerkbait's really good, going to come in handy. That's where maybe a square bill, even maybe a little bit bigger square bill than this, that runs just a little bit deeper. So let's talk about primarily your bottom baits, okay? Your rubber worms, things like that. Most of them, you put a weight on there, you cast out, and you're dragging it on the bottom. Here we have a drop shot. This is a good bait for catching fish on the bottom. You can fish a lot of these baits other ways, but this is pretty much your bottom bait. You let that thing down, let that hit bottom, and this little thing will set in the water, about a foot up off the bottom, where it's really good and visible down on the bottom. Okay, another really good bottom bait is your a jig. A jig is a really good bait for focusing in on the bottom. You can put a trailer on there, really imitate a crawdad. You can imitate a bluegill, a brim, depending on whatever colors you have or whatever, but it really focuses in on the bottom. So you let this thing down, let it on the bottom, and you can bounce it off the bottom, whatever, things like that. Another really good bottom bait, for the most part, is your deep diving crankbaits, especially in your deeper water. This is a 8XD. I think this thing's going to hit around 20 foot. So about 20 foot deep, you're going to be digging in the bottom, 18, 20 foot deep, somewhere right in there. Depending on your line size, you could get a little deeper, you could run a little shallower. But that's a good bottom bait. It's going to be digging in the bottom the whole time. And depending on your water depth, depending on the size crankbait you want and stuff like that. Another bait I want to come back to real quick, I just showed it to you, but it's the jig. This is one of my favorite baits. And a lot of people's favorite baits, and the reason it's so versatile. This one bait, just like I have set up, I can fish this thing pretty much a topwater bait, and I can fish it anywhere from the top all the way to the very bottom. Okay, depending on how I fish it. It's a very versatile bait. Depending on how you fish it. If you throw it out, you can reel it super fast, rod tip up high, and it makes a wake, and it's a dynamite way, especially if you're in that little bit shallower water. If them fish are keying in up on top, but they just don't want that actual top water bait, if they're not hitting your top water really good, but they're keyed in on that, this is a really good way to fish it. You can slow it down a little bit, hold your rod tip down a little bit, drop it down another foot, 2 foot, 3 foot, 4 foot, 5 foot, 10 foot. You can bounce off the bottom at 20, 25, 30 foot, however you want to do it. But the main thing I wanted to talk about and explain was fish are not always, it's a huge, especially catfish. I mean, just about everybody knows bass will hit top water. Bass will be in the middle, bass will be on the bottom. Some people don't know they're on the bottom. A lot of people don't know that bass feed on the bottom a lot. They feed in the midsection a lot. They feed on the upper section a lot. One key thing that I think you can look for is, what are your bait doing? If you see a lot of bait hitting the top of the water, you want to probably start by keying in and focusing on that upper part of the water column. If they're not hitting top water, then you may drop down a few inches to a foot. Focus in on the upper section. If you If you notice, maybe you're looking on your depth finder that a lot of your bait's in the middle, you know, you're over 20 foot of water and they're sitting in that 10, 12 foot, go to a jerk bait. Fish that jerk bait down in there about that 10 and 12 foot range, okay? You know, up above them. A lot of times when fish are like that, you got bait fish working, a lot of times they're looking up, so you want the bait just right above your main fish. A lot of times you don't want to be fishing up under the fish. Okay, so if you've got fish that are keyed in on 10 foot deep, you know, and maybe they're sitting 11 foot deep or something, you want to probably get your bait up above them by a couple foot, depending on the water clarity. Depends on the distance you can really get above them. If the water's super clear, you can even go up even higher, maybe 7 foot deep, where they've got to come up 3 or 4 foot to get the bait. If it's more dingy, you want to get a little bit closer to them because they're not going to be able to see it as good. So this video here, just like I said, just a basic understanding of the different water columns as you're fishing, and this applies to every type of fish that I've ever fished here in Arkansas. I'm not sure about some of the other types of fish, every type of fish, but every type of fish that I know of feeds at different parts of the water column, and they can do that from one day to the next, and also from one part of the day to another part of the day. Middle of the day, they may be feeding on the bottom. The evening, they may be feeding up top. I've noticed a lot, especially when fronts and storm systems come in. You get rain, you get wind, stuff like that. I've noticed that a lot of times they'll change on where they key in, what part of the water column that they key in on. A lot of times they don't go anywhere, but they just key in on a different part of the water column. So anyways, this is Jacob Schmitt with huntfishlife.com. I hope you enjoyed this video here. I hope you learned something from it. Excuse me. I hope you learned something from it. Please like, share my video, and subscribe to my channel. There's going to be more coming, much more coming. I'm going to be going out on the water, making fishing videos, recording videos, fishing videos on the water, tips, tactics, things like that. So look for more information, things like that. And if you're into hunting, deer hunting, you can check out my website, deerhuntingschool.com. So anyways, guys, hope you enjoyed it. Have a good day, and bye-bye.